Hey guys, welcome to Star Wars Timeline. My name is Ben and I'm continuing to watch and review the Droids show. It's something that my fans have asked for, that I take a look at the show and they're curious to find out what my thoughts are. I've already reviewed the first 4 episodes, we're now on episode 5, The Lost Prince. Spoiler alert guys, if you don't want to find out the story and the characters in this particular episode, please skip forward to my impression part of the video segment, which I will timestamp. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into it. So how do we start? We of course are back to our heroes C-3PO and R2-D2, and now they are without masters. They're alone in the galaxy again, and they're looking for work, which is not surprising. They start off in the original film as these 2 droids, and they find out all these friends along the way, and that's how this episode continues that kind of the trend, that they're only can invest and trust into each other, and they're alone in the galaxy. And they get to this planet. They go to a diner and they want to hire themselves out as helpers. And this was the first thing that I really enjoyed about this episode, because I couldn't help but I see all the similarities with the prequels. Remember in Attack of the Clones in episode 2, when Obi-Wan Kenobi goes to that diner and he has this 4-armed alien creature that he hugs, they're like old buddies, and he starts finding out about the Mandalorian dart that they found, discovered when the attack was made on Padme Amidala. And when you look at this particular diner, you can't help but see similarities. The 4-armed bartender, and all the atmosphere going around there. I was like, okay, that's pretty cool to see some ideas from this old 1985 show translate into something that George Lucas did later on. Anyway, they get hired by no other than the bad guy of this episode. He's not necessarily a gangster, but he kind of like bosses around this town. And the town itself has like a very Tatooine-like Mos Eisley frontier kind of feel. Anyway, his name is Mr. Kleb, and he has his little alien 80 called Yorpo. And he's swagging around, he's telling everybody what to do. And as we are spending some time in this diner, we also find out that Kleb gets a bounty. He needs to find somebody before IG-88 finds him. Obviously, we know that's the assassin droid we saw in the original trilogy. We also see him in Mandalorian. So that was a nice Easter egg, also calling back to the original trilogy, which obviously came before this show. But it still is trying to connect the droids with the rest of the Star Wars lore, which was in its earliest stages when the show was made. So there's a 40,000 casual bounty on this little person they need to find. Eventually, of course, the droids get thrown out of this diner and they go to this auction, which again, I felt kind of jives with the whole Star Wars thematics, that there is these droids, they have feelings, but at the same time, they're treated like, machines, and, obviously they need, help around a town, just like Uncle Owen needed droids to help around his moisture farm. And we find the first protagonist of the show, who is of this episode, who is John. And, he makes the trade. He shows the gesture of kindness, and he sees that the droids are in distress. They're basically being offered for a very cheap price. He trades his mining droid for R2-D2 to C-3PO, and also grabs another android. And, you kind of question why. And honestly, as I was watching the episode, I didn't pay too much attention to him. I'm like, okay, that's just another droid creature they're putting in there in this episode just for kids to take a look at and say like, oh, look, more robots, it's something interesting. So I was honestly thrown off. Never mind the fact that it's a kid's show. Even I was thrown off. I didn't understand who he was. Anyway, John brings the droids to his Uncle Gundy, who is this very eccentric and interesting man, of course with a southern accent, and again reinforcing the idea that it's like a southern sort of like frontier place, and they're trying to make a living also in the mines. And along with them, the third android that they bring in, he falls off from the vehicle, and we find out that he's not droid at all. He's just this mindless creature who's like babbling about, and we don't know who he is. Is he always been this way, or what's his background, what's his story? Anyway, and they call him Keziban. After they find out, they feed this creature because obviously John and his uncle, they're being kind persons, they're helping him out. And he goes to work in this mine with them, and as it's about to collapse, he saves Uncle Gundy, and they call him Kazaban. That's the nickname they give him, the one who comes from makes it back from the other world. So I've thought there was an interesting little interaction between the characters, and showing the kids that you're supposed to show kindness to strangers, regardless who they are, what they look like. And the moment that his face was unveiled and we find out that's a living creature, I started wondering, like, hold on a second. I thought it was going to be that human John that we saw earlier on the auction that's going to be the Lost Prince. And that's why, they're highlighting him first in the episode. But after this reveal, I was still a little bit conflicted. I didn't know, like, okay, so is this new creature the prince, or is this the human? And I felt this was a very effective on the behalf of the story writers for this episode to kind of keep the audience guessing and throwing you off to actually figure out who is the prince. So the little mystery was there, and I enjoyed it. Now we're back to the diner in the evening time, and we see this musical number. We see the blue little elephant creature from the Return of the Jedi. We see the lady with like sticky legs there, and she's like standing and dancing with a microphone. That was also a very cool callback to the original trilogy. And I think it was done very intentionally, obviously, not just to reiterate those visuals, to kind of reinforce the idea that there could be like traveling bands and they could have been on Tatooine at one point and now they're here. It's tying the universe together, and it's building that Star Wars world, which we have to remember, this is 1985. And outside of the original Star Wars films, and one of just very few books, I think the original Han Solo trilogy was out, and of course Alan Dean Foster's Splinters of the Mind Eye was released. But once again, there was very little lore, and the show made an effort to make a connection with the movies, which I felt was very well done. I'm like, okay, this is cool, and there's people are dancing around, and now there's scenery has changed, and it's like now nighttime, and you kind of like experiencing this town from a different perspective. It almost reminds me of the Mandalorian episode, The Marshal, when they go there again. Once again, they're reinforcing this Wild West kind of look and feel where everybody fends for themselves, and they got to carve out their little piece of livelihood. So it was cool. We're back to Mr. Kleb, and he's plotting once again, and his creature, 80 Yorpo, tells him also that there is this Nergon mineral, a highly volatile iron or something like that the Empire desperately needs because they're building the Death Star, obviously. The show takes place before the original trilogy. Another cool tie-in with the Empire, and I really want to see more. I'm like, okay, so a couple of elements in the children's show allude to something that adults can enjoy. I'm like, okay, this is how the Imperial Industrial Machine works. They go to these forgotten planets that nobody cares about. They're looking at the mines, and they're hiring local, thugs like this Mr. Kleb, and they're telling, get us the iron and we'll pay you. That was very cool. I also enjoyed that. And we also know that he's after the prince because he was hired out, and there's 40,000 casual bounty on him. Of course, John and droids are trying to make an escape there, but they're being captured and they're taken to the mines. And as they were making the escape, John drives this unicycle, which pretty much looks identical to what General Grievous drives in the Return of Revenge of the Sith, Episode 3. And I couldn't help but see the comparison, and I'm looking at this like, hold on a second. Once again, George Lucas, it's as if he's going back to his ideas book or visual kind of like guys that they've been drawing, and he's saying, okay, I really like that about the droid show. I like that vehicle. Let's put it in the prequels, and let's have this, evil droid Grievous drive it. I'm like, okay, pretty cool. I may not be the biggest prequels fan, but from the visual standpoint, it had such an interesting visual language, and all the vehicles and all the equipment and the planes, the way they look, it was really, really awesome. So they're in the mines, and of course the Kleb is trying to exploit all the our friends and the droids. And this is where I felt the episode got a little bit convoluted, because there's a whole bunch of action where they're trying to escape, and C-3PO with his slapstick humor and antics is trying to get them out. And there's a couple of scenes there which are they're just disorienting visually. I'm like, and I'm watching the episode. I'm enjoying the story, but as I'm watching the episode, I'm like, oh, okay, can we get through this part here? It's just a little bit all over the place. So that was one which I could criticize. Say this is where the episode was at its lowest point. But it was still nice to see that there is a whole a reason to it. That the club is not only after this one person, this prince, but he also wants to grab the mineral which the Empire needs. And you almost built this connection by saying, okay, so what the Empire is doing is they're subjugating these people, because the prince couldn't talk in the beginning of the episode because some vizier put some charm or spell on him to make him dumb and stupid. So I guess because the Empire wanted to exploit this planet and didn't want any obstruction to his plans. So that was still very effective. As I'm watching this scene unfolding, it's a little bit visually disorienting and confusing. I'm still following the story. And the premise is pretty good, and that's the strength of this episode. Anyway, the friends escape, and as the Kazaban returns to his people, he thanks the droids, and of course the droids are still staying with Gandhi and his nephew, John. So it felt like at the end of this episode, there was a really cool moral of telling our friends that, look, you should not judge the strangers by the way that they look, and you should always help people who are in need. For those of you guys who grew up with the He-Man show, the original one, at the end of each episode, they had this sort of kind of like, which seems today cheesy or preachy, segment where He-Man or a character from the show would say like, and this is because you do this and that, kind of like a teachable moment. But of course, they had to break it down for a younger generation and explain what this episode was about. In the instance of the Droid show, it didn't try to do that. The episode basically tells you the story and it wraps up very quickly, and it's simple and very digestible for kids and adults to understand what it's about. It's about friendship, and it's about not judging people, and giving it your all, trying to help them. So what are some of the highlights that I really liked it? Once again, I think the show has beautiful artwork. I loved going to this cantina or this diner, whatever you want to call it. It looked really awesome. All of the machinery and this tractor and this beam shooting machine in the mining facility also looked really, really cool. I can't imagine what a modern day Star Wars animated show would look like if it was done by hand, if it had the traditional art style the way the Droid has. Guys, as an animator myself, I would love to see something like that, because the Droids show, an older show, has that very, very beautiful artwork, and it has a very distinct look and feel about it. I felt the story was actually good, surprisingly. I did not expect any other episode to top the previous one, episode 4, where obviously Boba Fett shows up. But this one held its own in terms of story. It's okay if the action sequence was a little bit disorienting and didn't deliver. That's not why I go to see Star Wars. I want to see cool story. I want to see cool characters. And from that perspective, the show keeps impressing me. I mean, it's not amazing. It's not the Bad Batch, but it's something more than I expected the show to be. And it's always a pleasant feeling. I got to say, the characters are also pretty cool. John, Alkan Gandhi, Mr. Kleb, very cool villain design. He was really awesome, and that shrieking voice that he makes, and he was able to kind of like stun everybody for a moment. That was pretty cool. I want to see more abilities on the villains like this from this point forward. And we also see a female character in the show, Jessica Meade, which she shows up and she helps our friends for a brief moment in the diner. I expected her to show up more in the episode. I hope they were setting her up for future episodes, because if not, she's just kind of there and they're saying like, hey, look, by the way, I'm here. I'm pretty girl and I just helped the guys, but I'm not going to be in the show anymore. I hope that's not the case, because she had a very strong and interesting character design. I always enjoy characters that have simple look, but there's something very distinct about them. And Jessica has this very cool, like, top crop hairstyle. And of course, she's black, which is also very nice to see in the show. And, they're not just throwing it in your face like, oh, by the way, look, we have this sort of character here. She feels like she populates this world. And she just happened to be in the cantina while our friends were struggling, and she helped them out. I was like, cool. I hope I get to see Jessica again. Of course, the Easter eggs, that I mentioned earlier in this review. When you go to the diner, you can't help but think of the Attack of the Clones diner room where Obi-Wan Kenobi goes. And it's such a fun moment to kind of see ideas translate from an earlier show to something that George Lucas does later on. That's always awesome to see. And of course, the music number that calls back to the Return of the Jedi was also pretty cool. All in all, I would say this is a fun episode. I usually don't like to rate this show, but if I were to give it a score, I'd probably give it 3 out of 4. The problematic action sequences towards like climax of the episode towards the end didn't work for me because they were a little bit visually disorienting. But the story was really interesting, and the episode held because of the strength of its characters and story and the heart. Really, it's trying to tell you something. Anyway, guys, this was my review. I hope you really enjoyed it. Please leave the comments in the section below and let me know what you thought of this episode, especially watching it after something as awesome as Boba Fett reprising his role and coming back and showing in episode 4. What were your thoughts and feelings going after and experiencing a new episode like this one? Anyway, I'm going to push on with the droids. Keep reviewing the episodes. I'm watching Star Wars Visions right now at the moment. I'm not rushing with it. I just saw the first 2 episodes. I will probably review the whole thing as one. It's going to be a pretty lengthy review. But if you guys are looking forward to something like that from my channel, please subscribe, hit that bell button so you don't miss my future videos. And I always appreciate your help and support. And I'll see you guys next week with another review from the Droids Show.